Well, my name is George D. Heron. I live on the Allegheny Indian Reservation. I'm a Seneca Indian. I'm past president of the Seneca Nation. And I was a past commander of the American Legion in Salamanca. And I served for 4 years and 3 days in the United States Navy. Well, to begin with, I'm 88 years old now. I was born in 1919 on George Washington's birthday, February 22nd. So, but there's where the resemblance ends. George Washington never told a lie. I guess I've told many of them. But at any rate, I had some previous military or paramilitary, you might call it, experience when I joined the CCCs in the Civilian and Conservation Corps back in 1936. The CCCs were one of Franklin D. Roosevelt's favorite gifts to the community, I guess you might call it. Anyway, you had to be 18 years old or older to belong to the CCCs. And the object of the CCCs was to give jobs to the younger people. In the Depression days, you know, and jobs were scarce, and so they devised the CCC, and they were run by the United States Army. We had an Army captain in charge of the camp and an Army lieutenant. They were reserve officers, and there were 200 men to a camp, and they had 3 of them in Allegheny State Park, and that's where I was to begin with, in Allegheny State Park. And we had a mess sergeant and a top sergeant and a supply sergeant, everything they have in the Army, and that's as far as the Army had to do with it. The actual work that we performed was under the supervision of the Department of Interior, and they had their own men, own staff there. And we stayed right there in the camp. There were 200 of us in 5 barracks, 40 men to a barracks. And most of in the camp I was in to begin with in State Park were local men, local boys, or whatever you want to call us. Some weren't 18 yet, I know that. Some joined when they were 16, and we were paid $30 a month. We only got $5 of it, and the other 25 went to your home, to your mother or father or whoever you designated to collect it, and that's where that was sent. So we had $5 to spend on ourselves every month, but it was a good life. I enjoyed it while I was in the CC camp. I was in for 2 years, and I met other kinds of people there. Once we got a shipment of new men to come in from Alabama. There were about 10 of them. They had a different type of language too. And another time we got some from Brooklyn. So I got to meet people from different walks of life, and I learned how they talk and how we talk, and their habits and our habits, and I got to know the human race a little better, and it was a great experience in the CC camp. Well, I enlisted in the Navy because I just didn't care for the Army. It looked like it involved a lot of hiking and walking and stuff like that, and I wanted to see the world anyway. And I was always amused by watching the movies sometimes of the Navy, and I decided that's for me. And I was probably just a few steps ahead of the draft, so I decided I want to go into the branch of my choice, so I joined the Navy before they drafted me. and that was in November 17th, 1941. And then they sent me to boot camp in Newport, Rhode Island. There were 8 companies there in training at a time in boot camp. And you worked your way up. When your first week there, you were you served in the mess hall and did the dishes and cleaned stuff like that. But there was a class graduating every week. Every week they graduated 200 men, and they were shipped out to either a school or a ship or another shore station. And the boot camp was in Newport, Rhode Island, which was a Navy base, and the training camp was there. And when you were in boot camp, you put on those leggings. You had to wear them all the time you were in boot training. And I don't know, we did a lot of marching there too. Our company officer was a chief petty officer in the regular Navy. He was a chief gunner's mate, and he had about 8 gold hash marks coming down there. He'd been in the Navy for a while, and it's a strange thing. The gold hash marks are good for good conduct, and some of them don't have the gold hash mark. They have the red hash mark. Those are the guys that got caught doing something wrong. At any rate, we didn't finish our boot training and war broke out. Pearl Harbor. I remember Pearl Harbor Day. Our company was, we had a 1 hour allotted to us to use the gymnasium there for play basketball or whatever we wanted to do. And we were marching back to the barracks from the gymnasium. And we met the other company just going down and hit it for the gym. And Earl John was in that company. He was from this reservation. And he hollered across, "Hey George, there's Japs bomb Pearl Harbor." And that's the first we knew of it. And after that, everything changed. It took our company after a couple of weeks, and we finished our training, and they kept half of us there on seaman guard duty, and the other half they sent out to ships right away, different ships. So I was in Newport until the last week in February, walking around with a musket on my shoulder and walking around the warehouses, the waterfront, and every other place I went. I got shipped out of there in the last week in February, or the first week in March. And I was sent to a hospital corps school in Brooklyn. When you enlisted, if your IQ was up there a ways, you qualified for one of the schools they could send you to, either an engineering school or for signalmen to a communication school and things like that. But my second preference was the hospital corps school, and that's where they sent me. And I was there for 8 weeks. I went to school every day except Saturday and Sunday. Attended school from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And they taught you everything they could cram into you in that 8 weeks' time.
Like what?
Oh, everything. One instructor was anatomy and physiology. You learned what your liver was all about and what it was used for and its functions and that sort of stuff. and there was a weights and measures pharmacy. You learn about the different drugs and grams and grains and milligrams and all that sort of stuff. And then there was first aid and minor surgery. Yes, was still another class. And everything I think there were 5 different classes that we had to attend every day. And at the end of that, I was given a diploma. I don't know what I did with it. My graduation there. By that time, it was toward the end of May, and I was transferred to the Philadelphia Naval Hospital. And I had a rating of hospital apprentice, 2nd class. I paid $34 a month. That's a big raise from my original salary I received in the Navy. It was only $17 a month when I was in boot camp. They paid you $8.50 every 2 weeks. But it was a hospital apprentice, 2nd class, and the Philadelphia Naval Hospital is a big structure. It's I think 16 stories high, and one of the most modern hospitals they had. They have them all over the country, you know. One in Boston, there's one in Brooklyn, and there's one in outside of Washington. I forget the name of it now, but that's the one I ended up in. And there, they give you a practical experience. I work in a pharmacy for a couple of weeks and learn. And I work in the X-ray department for a couple of weeks. And I work in the OR, the operating room, for a couple of weeks. And I did general ward duty. And anyway, you get experience in every facet there, on-the-job training, I guess you call it. And finally, I stayed in Philadelphia. May, June, July, August, September. I stayed in Philadelphia for 5 months. And that was a good life there. I mean, you're in a city, you get acquainted. You know that if you get on that subway out there, it runs straight through, and it's a fast subway too. And then one day, my orders came in to be transferred to the United States ship John Penn. Well, I was transferred to the Norfolk, what they call a receiving station, and then my orders at FFT for further transfer to the USS John Penn. And when I was in the receiving station for 3 or 4 days, I was told that John Penn had sailed for the Pacific 2 weeks ago. So my orders were changed again, and I was in that receiving station until the first week in October. And then I was taken out to the USS Charles Carroll. It was anchored out in the bay there. And I wasn't on there very long, and we pulled into Newport News and loaded up with the third division, infantry division. Our whole transport unit consists of 4 amphibious transports and 2 supply transports. They're bigger booms on there, and they carry the tanks and stuff like that. But the amphibious transport are strictly for personnel. So we loaded up with the 3rd division. Our whole transport division went in there, and we carried the whole 3rd division, and we set sail for North Africa. It took us a couple of weeks to get there. We went down south a ways to get away from the submarine menace, and that was a big convoy. many ships. And there were 3 different places where they landed in North Africa. We landed in what they call the Casablanca landings. We didn't land in Casablanca, we landed in Fidela, which was about 4 miles away from Casablanca, but just sort of a small inlet there where the transports pulled in. And early in the morning they started lowering the boats for the infantry to get in. They didn't know whether the French were going to be fighting or welcoming us. It turned out they were going to be fighting. So when the troops landed, they were met with a gunfire, and the French had some coastal guns out there too. They started firing at the ships, and so nothing exciting happened to us the first 2 days we were there. It took us we had a lot of things that had to be taken ashore too from in our small boats, and we were still anchored out there. And this 3rd day we were there in the evening. By that time the German U-boats knew that the landings were taking place, and they arrived on us, and they sunk 4 of our transports. Finally we went in there and finished unloading, and we set sail for the U.S. after that. Came back to Norfolk. You know what the sailors call Norfolk? Shit city. They didn't like it. There's nothing but sailors there. Sailors and people who don't like us. Around Thanksgiving time, 1942. And then the day after Christmas, we set sail again, and this time we were headed for the Pacific. Going into Cologne, that's on the Atlantic side of the Panama Canal. They have a channel you had to go. You had to go through that channel because there's minefields on each side. And just before we entered the channel, we were hit by a torpedo, and it blew our rudder and screws off. We had no way to steer the ship, or no propeller to propel it, and we were floating around out there. And the rest of the ships went on through, and they sent a seagoing tug out from Cologne, and it towed us into Cologne. And that.
What did it feel like to get hit by a torpedo? I mean, did you know something happened?
We lost 2 men.
Yeah, wow.
They were blown over the fantail. Somebody said they were out on the fantail playing acey-deucey. And I don't know where they were, but that's what one of the shipmates said. That's where he saw them last. And we were towed into the port of Cologne there, and they decided, they thought about it, or what they were going to do with us. They hated to tow us through the locks. Something might happen, and the lock would be the nearest dry dock that could handle a ship our size was in New Orleans. So they had to do one of the two: tow us to New Orleans or tow us through the locks. They chose to tow us through the locks, and that was a nice little trip through the locks, and they put us in dry dock in Balboa on the Pacific side. And we stayed there for 2 months. There was a 2 months vacation there for us, I'll tell you right now. We organized a softball league there, and we'd go over to Fort Amador Beach. That was the Army base there, Fort Amador. And some of those smaller islands out there. We used to go out to one, Taboga Island, and it was, there were motor torpedo boat base there. They had 6 of them. We'd go out there just for a ride on one of our small boats. And finally that ended, and one day we went back through the locks and back up to Norfolk. And we weren't in Norfolk very long. We did some maneuvering in Chesapeake Bay, and then one day we pulled into the docks in Newport News again. At night, a couple of troop trains come in there, and I see the soldiers coming up the gangplank. It was dark, of course, and they always load up in the dark. Whether they're German spies actually there, or someone that can report it, I don't know, but they were troops of the 45th Division, Oklahoma, Kansas National Guard. Oh, there were a lot of buckskins in that division. When I got up the next morning, they were all over the place, and hey, where'd all these Indians come from? But they were tough to fish in. Went back across the Atlantic again. We landed over in Oran. That's where they disembarked. And we went to an air force base in a place called Mers El Kabir. I guess Mers is the name for sea or bottle of water in French. Mers El Kabir. And I think on July 9th, we made the invasion of Sicily. The 45th landed in Scaglietti. They landed 3 divisions in Sicily. The first, which was an experienced division, and the 3rd division, the division that we had originally landed in Casablanca, and the 45th. And it was a little different there. There was a big mix-up, and they shot down some of our paratroopers. The paratroopers were supposed to make a landing just before daylight there, and I think it was the 82nd Airborne. I'm not sure now, but they shot down some of those planes. They weren't supposed to be over our convoy in the first place.
It was friendly fire.
Our orders were anything that's up above us is enemy, because they got their own routes to go in our aircraft. But they were out of whack, and so some of them got shot down. Paratroopers, some of them were taken aboard our ship. The plane got shot down, but they were able to get out, and they had parachutes on and land in the water. And we came under attack from the dive bombers at first touch of daylight, and those German Stukas come out, and they sunk one destroyer, and they missed it. I don't know, they had pretty good air cover there from Malta. The British had their Spitfires base on Malta, and those Stukas were mincemeat for them. They were much slower flying plane, and anyway, the landings were successful. The 45th especially gave a good account of themselves. They were in Palermo within a week. They went right across the island, and when we finished unloading our ship, we went back to Mers El Kabir again and hung around there. That was our operating base. And then we one day we went to a place called Mostaganem, and we picked up some troops there. They boarded our ship, and they were the 36th Division. And we made some practice landings there with the 36th Division. So that told us the next troops we take to a beachhead are going to be the 36th Division. They were a Texas division. So in September, when did we sail for Salerno?
For the 5th.
September 6th. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we sailed for Salerno, our convoy there. And that was the roughest time we had in the Mediterranean at Salerno. They started bombing us on our way in that night. They knew we were coming. And they had moved troops and tanks up to the beachhead and all that sort of stuff. That's why they refer to it as Bloody Salerno. And they hit a number of ships. This is the first time they used that glide bomber. It's controlled by a mothership from up, and they radio control, and they can. And they hit one of our cruisers, light cruisers, and they hit a couple of British ships. And it was one heck of a battle on shore there. The 36th Division lost heavily. But eventually the tide turned and they were able to move inland. Well, there were mountains in the background there, I remember that, but the beaches were level. The Isle of Capri is right in that bay there. We sailed past the Isle of Capri a number of times. And you could see, I don't know, it looked like fireworks. And you could hear the explosions from the bombs and the artillery. But and one of our small ships caught fire, and the gas went up in flames. And it was at night. We got out there a ways, and we could see one of the destroyers firing at something on the water, and they said it's German E-boats, torpedo boats. And all of a sudden that ship exploded, the Rowan did. And we picked up some of the survivors. No, we didn't either. That was another time. No, we didn't pick up none of the survivors. But I had a good friend on the USS Rowan. I had seen him in Oran just a couple of weeks before. His name was Donald Blacksnake. And then I got thinking, gee, he's on that's the ship he was on. And he's probably in the bottom of the sea now. But when I saw him at the end of the war, he said he was on a gun mount, and the whole gun mount got blown out into the water, and him and the 4 other guys in that gun mount stuck together, and they were picked up the next morning by a minesweeper. But Salerno was always rough when we took troops back there for reinforcement. The next one, we came right back to Oran and loaded up again with the 34th Division. And we went right back to Salerno again, and well, this time it was quick. We didn't haul no, just the troops when we got them off. And for the first time they had a few LSTs there. That was the first time they ever used any LSTs. And we made several trips back to Salerno, back and forth, and finally they captured Naples, and we made a run into Naples with some troops. I think twice we went to Naples. Oran to Naples Express. But they had things pretty well under control, you know, in the air, and we weren't bombed anymore. And we went back to Naples for the last time. We left there on Thanksgiving Day. I don't know what there is about Thanksgiving Day, but we boarded some British troops. They had been fighting in the desert, and then later on in Sicily and desert rats, I guess they used to call them. And they were going home to England. So we knew where we were going from there. And sure enough, when we sailed out of the Mediterranean, we went through the Straits of Gibraltar and went up to Gurrock, Scotland, at the mouth of the Clyde River. And there we tied up to a pier, and the British troops all took off. But we stayed in Glasgow. Well, it wasn't Glasgow, it was Gurrock was the name of the base. We stayed there for 10 days. The whole transport division and the destroyers that were with us. We got to enjoy 2 or 3 liberties in Glasgow and get some of that Scotch whiskey down our gullets. The train would pull up, the railroad passenger train, and take a whole bunch of us in from those other transports. And I stayed overnight one night in Glasgow. I stayed in a hotel, and they had the big ha'pennies. They're a coin, halfpenny, and that's how you heated your room. You had to put it in that register there, and you had to pay for your heat with the ha'pennies. The rooms weren't any too warm neither. It was in the winter time, you know, and it gets cold up there, just like it does here. And then the worst experience we've ever had at sea, I ever have had, was when we left Gurrock and sailed for the good old USA. Oh, it was around Christmas Day, I think. And we ran into a storm out there right off the bat. Oh man, waves 60 foot high. It seemed like we'd go up and we'd be down in a little valley there, and we'd go up and then splash back down again. And well, the only good thing about it was the U-boats couldn't navigate in that weather either. I stayed below decks. Nobody was allowed topside except those who had business up there. And then they had the lines that they had to hang on to and everything. And I tell you, you couldn't. There was nothing you could do. It's a helpless feeling. If there's German bombers up there, you can fire at them with your guns, and your planes can shoot them down. Or if they're underneath the sea, you can sink the sub. But there, you're in the hands of God Almighty. And that's what you call being battered by the elements. You know, that's the worst storm I was ever in. I think I can remember those big waves, you know. You look up there, and then you're way down here, and you wonder whether you're going to get capsized or what's going to happen. No, boy, it seems so good, you know, when the storm abated and things got back down to normal, and next thing you know, you're just a few hours out of Norfolk. In Norfolk, I was given a 10-day leave. And when I came back off my leave, their ship had been moved to a dock over in Portsmouth, over across the river. And the officer of the deck asked me what my name was, and I told him he looked in the list, he says, don't bother unpacking. He says, you're being transferred. He says, have your stuff ready here within the next hour, and I'll have transportation for you. And that was it with the Charles Carroll. They sent me to Little Creek, Virginia, to the amphibious training base. And that's where I was assigned to the LST 609. There were only 8 of us there to begin with for the crew, and we were all veterans. Had been seen action, like a chief boatswain mate. He'd been through a bit, and so was the gunner's mate, and the chief motor machinist's mate. But every day we got 8 or 9 more. And of course, the captain and executive officer were there right away, and we stayed in Quonset huts. And one time we finally reached our quota. We had our 112 men that it takes to man an LST. And one night we marched down to where the railroad came in there, and two crews, 608 and 609, and we ended up in the Navy Pier in Chicago. And there we waited till our ships were finished building. They built those LSTs on those rivers there, Illinois River and Wabash and the Allegheny and, well, the Ohio River, because they have no keel. They're flat bottom. They're 328 foot long, the length of a football field, plus 28 feet. And they have the tank deck. You can carry a whole bunch of tanks in the tank deck. But the good thing about them was you could go right up to the beach and open the bow doors and drop the ramp, and they just drive out of there. In most cases, yeah. The bad thing about it was their top speed was 7 knots. That's not traveling very fast. Anyway, we one day we left Navy Pier, marched on to the Rock Island Railroad station. It took us down to Seneca, Illinois. That's where our ship was being built. Out in the open. And then we watched them launch our ship sideways, splash down into the Illinois River. We went aboard and set the watch, and there was a pilot that came aboard with us who knows the river, and he took over the wheel and everything. We didn't go very far. We got as far as Grafton, and then there was high water. Couldn't get under the bridge. So there was one other LST ahead of us had been there for a little while, I guess. And eventually there were 3 or 4 LSTs waiting to travel down to New Orleans. And finally water went down far enough, and we changed pilots 3 times, I think. Each pilot knew his own stretch of the river. I'd like to make the money those fellows made, knowing what they did about it. And we'd arrive in New Orleans. And one day the Navy band came aboard, and the big shot from the Navy, and they put the ship in commission and raised the commission pennant, and we became an official part of the United States Navy, LST 609. We took a shakedown cruise, what they call a shakedown cruise, over in Panama City, Florida. St. Andrews Bay. It's way up in northern Florida where the Panhandle is. And there we made our first runs into the beach. And we retracked it and make another run. You have a rear anchor that you're supposed to drop off. And when you retract from the beach, you help by winching yourself off to that rear anchor. You had to learn all that. The good part about that was after we beach, we'd hang around on the beach a while and go swimming and stuff like that. And we got our orders to go back to New Orleans, and they loaded the tank deck with, guess what? Beer. blats. I don't know how many cases. They were all wired together, 2 cases. They were canned. And that was our cargo. And on there it said Base Howe. Well, it didn't take us very long to figure out where that was. That was Honolulu, Oahu, Hawaii, and we knew we were headed for the Pacific. So once again we went through the canal. I think there were 14 LSTs. Went up the west coast to San Diego and took on 5 or 6 more LSTs. Our flotilla strength with 19 LSTs. Then we set out across the Pacific. That's a tedious journey. At that rate of speed, you know. You wake up in the morning, look out there, the same water, the same ships around you, the same escorts out there. We got to Hawaii, and one episode there, we had to wait out there. We couldn't go into the harbor right away. They were waiting for a ship from the United States to come in there, the USS Baltimore. President Roosevelt was aboard it. They were bringing him to that conference he had there with MacArthur and Nimitz. So finally, when that went through, we finally got to go in. And we were just entered the lock. There's 3 locks there. East lock, west lock, and the center lock. And we had just started down the center lock, and the blinker was going from the signal tower up there. You're going in the wrong lock. Turn around and go back. So the captain had an idea. He just reversed the engines and cut the rudder, and like you would a car, you know. And well, there was a sandbar back there, and we ended up with the props in the sandbar. So there's another tug, and the guy in command of the tug was a first-class quartermaster, Navy man, first-class petty officer. And, hey, hook on! You know, he threw their line over, and they hooked onto. He said, just cut your motors. He said, I'll take you to where you're going. Ignominy, you. so he towed us into, and all those other LSTs followed in behind. Well, anyway, we finally got out of Hawaii. We went over to the island of Maui, and we loaded up with some troops from the 7th Division. They had fought over in Attu, in Alaska, Aleutian Islands, and a lot of them had frozen some of their toes off, and because they didn't have the proper footwear. They were trained to fight in the South Pacific, and when they finally made a landing, it was in Attu, out in the tundra and the cold. But they were a good division, and when they took them off of Attu, they brought them back to Hawaii, and they garrisoned them there. They rode around the islands in their jeeps and lorries, and they got the nickname of the Sightseeing 7th. That guy lives up the road from me here. He was in the Sightseeing 7th. I kid him about it, you know, Scotty Hanlon. And on Maui, we took them aboard, and we made a couple of practice beachings with them. And so they knew just what they were doing. We knew what we were doing. And the next time we took them aboard, they brought their bidding with them. Well, not that. They had cots to accommodate them too in the sleeping quarters. We headed for the Southern Pacific, and we went to an island called Manus Island, 2 degrees below the equator. Boy, it's hot there. You could see the heat coming off the deck. You could fry an egg on the deck. Yes, that's right. A guy did it. He says, look at this. And well, we sailed from there for the invasion of Leyte. returned to the Philippines from MacArthur. And we landed the 7th Division at a place called Dulac. It was on Leyte, in the Gulf of Leyte there, on Leyte Island. And we didn't stay there long, just long enough for them, for the rolling stock, everything on wheels, left. And we retracted from the beach, and we had all kinds of stuff inside there. You had everything from chicken wire to sea rations to ammunition and 1,000 jerry cans of gasoline that had to be unloaded. So we pulled out from Blue Beach and we went way, I don't know, it seemed like we traveled 6 or 7 miles to Red Beach. And we beached there again. And we started unloading the stuff there. They had beach parties that unloaded us. And I was down by the bow doors talking to some of the natives there. They came over looking for cigarettes and stuff, soap. And we saw some guys running down the beachhead and hollered out, "What's going on? MacArthur coming ashore." So I joined the running crowd, and I got just so far, then there was a cordon of military police there, and we waited there, and sure enough, here comes this tank ladder in. I was standing right there when I see MacArthur, waiting to buff his knees a little bit, I guess. And I didn't realize then, but I witnessed the history. But you know, when you're out there like that, you just think, well, I saw MacArthur come ashore. No, when we finished unloading, we a whole bunch of LSTs, our whole flotilla, pulled out. We were lucky we didn't lose any, and we went back to the New Hebrides, way down near Australia there, Espiritu Santos, and there was a whole lot of equipment and stuff that had to be moved to the forward areas. We loaded it up with everything we could get aboard that LST and headed back for Leyte. By that time, they were making the main operating base in the Pacific, Leyte Gulf. And we went back a second time to the Russell Islands and picked up some stuff there, and back to Leyte. And then on sometimes the middle of December, our flotilla loaded up with troops. We were going someplace, and that's all that went was our flotilla, 19 LSTs and their escort. We had about 8 destroyer escorts, I guess. Yeah, and I don't know, we stayed out of sight of those other islands. We went out there a ways and then come back in. And we were supposed to land there as soon as it got daylight. But we were way behind time, and we were way out, maybe 30 miles yet from the landing area, and they spotted us coming in. And that's when we got hit by the kamikazes. They sunk 2 of our LSTs, and the third one they set it afire, and that's where my shipmate there writes how they missed us. They shot down the plane. Alert, and the word come over the loudspeaker. Bogies at 2 o'clock. A bogey is an unidentified plane. So everybody looked toward noon is the direction you're headed, and 2 o'clock is look in that direction. And sure enough, we could see them way out. Looked like a bunch of flies coming at us. That's what it reminded me of. You knew they were after us. We didn't have no air support because they couldn't risk any aircraft carriers in there among the islands because there was the Japs had little airfields on every one of those islands, and so they all got. There were no more kamikazes left after the attack. Well, they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to sacrifice their plane and their lives. And most of them got shot out of the sky. And we had the destroyers there. They got longer range AK. They were 5-inch guns there. They can reach way further than we can. We have to wait till they get close to us with our 40 millimeters. 5 minutes. They came out, and as soon as they got within range, we started firing them at them. And in 5 minutes, they were either all shot down or. But they did sink 2 of the LSTs, and they set another one afire. He was way over here. He made it to a beach, but the smoke was coming out and everything. And the army disappeared and left us on the beach, and we had all that stuff to unload. So the captain said the words out that we've got to unload this ourselves, and let's be out of here by sundown, you know. But about 11 o'clock that morning, we had another alert. Planes coming in, and they were friendly P-38s. They had secured the airstrip there and wired back to Leyte, OK, to send the air support. And those were P-38s, friendly planes. No, we had air cover for Lingayen Gulf. And believe it or not, we loaded up with the same 7th Division that we took into Leyte. The same guys, I got to know some of them from gambling with them, you know, and I asked him, how'd you fare on Leyte, you know, no casualties. But they were in tanks, but among the infantry, the 7th, the foot soldiers, they suffered pretty heavy. So we landed, we went to Lingayen Gulf. That was a big, I don't know, they must have had a couple hundred LSTs there. That was their main amphibious weapon, the LST. They built over 1,000 of them during the war. And we landed on the beach there. And we had a lot of stuff to take off, and the tide went out, and half of our ship was in the water and half of it was on dry land. So when it got dark, pow, there was an explosion on the beachhead, and the Japs had 2 mountain guns back there in the mountains, and they had that beach zeroed in. Gee, everybody went below decks. They were using anti-personnel shells that kill people. And you can't sink a ship with them, I don't think, but they couldn't sink us anyway. We were beasts. But still, the fragments could kill us. And we were watching. You could see it would light up way back there in the mountains. You see a flash, and you could count to 8, and that shell exploded someplace on the beachhead. And it was 8 miles away, they figured, that those guns were. Wow. Mountain guns. Well, they pulled in a couple cruisers close to shore, and a destroyer, and they shelled the hell out of it, where the fire was. That's the end of that. Yeah, gee whiz, here they come again, another explosion. I guess they sent a battalion of troops up there the next morning, and the guns were coming out of caves. They had little railroads. They'd wheel them out to the mouth of the cave with fire and back inside. And the troop that went up, they went to the top of the mouth of the cave, and they had what they call the Bangalore torpedoes. They get them to swinging on a piece of rope, and when it's going like that, the pendulum, they let go of it, and it continues on into the cave and blows them out. And that's the only bad experience we had in Lingayen. The Jap planes, we didn't see many of them around. They went after they were after the bigger ships anyway, cruisers and battleships, you know. But we went back to Leyte afterwards and loaded up again, and we went and made another landing at San Antonio. That's on Bataan. And after that, that was our fourth landing in the Pacific. Leyte, Mindoro, Lingayen, San Antonio. And then we went back to Leyte Gulf and got ready to sail for Okinawa. We arrived at Okinawa on Easter morning, April 1st, 1945, they invaded Okinawa. That's where the kamikazes were the thickest. They were all over. Everything that could fly, they put in the air with a bomb in it. And even a training plane or something like that, and big enough to carry a bomb and big enough to crash into to one of the ships. They raised heck with the carriers out there. Oh, the Franklin and the Intrepid and the Cabot and several others. The Franklin lost over 1,000 men. And they sunk a number of destroyers and other ships. Troops, yeah. They were amphibious. No, they weren't amphibious troops. They were regular tanks. You couldn't get up to the beach. They had a road mapped over the coral. There were purple markers all the way where they go. I think we were about, I would get 300 yards from the beach, our LST. The first vehicle to drive off was a Jeep. You went out there a ways and it disappeared. And they thought, well, it'll better get the life-saving equipment. We'll be bobbing up there someplace. But they never bobbed up. So the Jeep must have got under a reef or something and they couldn't get out. So they changed, they had to wait and they checked it out and then they made another route around where that went. But the second time we went back to Okinawa, they had secured quite a bit of the beach by that time. And that's where I got one of my citations. Well, I got one citation in when we were on Samar loading out, and they used to have that plane come over every night. Washing Machine Charlie, they called him. And he'd drop a bomb someplace, and he never hit anything. But this one time he lucked out, and there were a number of LST lined up loading out, and he hit that LST, one LST over from us. He got his bomb in there. At any rate, they sent out a call for pharmacist mates to come over to the LST there. And so I went over. I told the other guys, you stay on duty here and I'll go over and see what I can do to help out. Well, it turned out to helping out, there was men in the engine room, and it was all smoky and hot in there, and they needed someone to go in there. And someone was they picked on the medics. So I went in. With a smoke, and I didn't know what to expect in there to find. And I saw an arm there, so I was able to. But he didn't. And by that time, another medic joined me. But I got a citation for it. We're anchored off there, offshore, and it was at night. It had just gotten dark, and one of the boats had broken loose from one of the other LSTs. They carried two LCIs, they call them, landing craft personnel, and it had broken loose, and it was bumping against our ship there along the side. And the officer of the deck told the coxswain from one of our small boats to go down and secure it. And so he went down and he got it, and it wouldn't start up. And in the meantime, it started drifting away from our ship, and he's on it. And so it drifted over past the fantail, and the officer of the deck, he was just a young guy. He told that Mangold, his name was, to jump off and swim back to the ship. Well, he jumped off, and there was a strong current going into the tide, going in toward the beach, and he couldn't make it. And somebody come down to the sick bay, and I was in the sick bay, and hey Doc, there's a Mangold's in the water down there, and he's yelling for help. And boy, I went up on top deck, and I was one of the older guys aboard ship. At age 25, and the officer of the deck didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, and he was just fresh out of one of those V6 programs. So I see him swim around, and I said, boy, I got to get him out of there. And I told him I took one of those donuts there, and I put it between my arms. And I said, give me plenty of line. Don't let go of that line either. And I jumped down. It was about 15 feet down to the water. And I got down in the water, and boy, I couldn't find him. There's the ripples, you know. So I hollered out, Mangold, where are you at? And I heard his voice, and I swam over there I said, grab a hold of this. Get your arm inside this donut here. And then I heard someone's voice in the water just a little ways from us. It was the captain. He had jumped in too. So between the two of us, we got Mangold back up into the aboard ship. Yeah. A lot of the Chinese rot, we used to call it. It's a trichomatosis fungus under the arms, in the crotch. And it's associated with the tropics. Oh, a lot of guys we used to take one Adabrin tablet every day against malaria. I had one guy had come down with an appendicitis attack. We were sailing between down around New Guinea someplace, and our captain notified the guy in charge of the convoy, and he says, have him ready for transfer. We'll call in one of the Catalina flying boats. They did, landed on the water right among our ships, and they took him in a boat and took him to a ship that had a doctor. None of the LSTs carried a doctor, and nor did those destroyer escorts neither. Yeah, we had medical whiskey aboard ship, all overhauled.
Really?
And I think there were 4 quarts of it left yet that was untouched. I remember one time we used 1 quart and put it in the coffee when we were taking that shelling while we were on Lingayen Gulf there. And the captain borrowed a quart too when his wife had a baby. But anyway, there were 4 quarts left. And yeah, hell, we were going to drink that up. And we did. And there was some beer left in the cooler too. You know, when we were at a recreation, like on Guam, what they call Gab Gab Beach, you could take your beer ashore with you. There was some of that left. You got rid of all of that. One thing about, they used to ship me a half a gallon of medical alcohol, 190 proof absolute alcohol every month for medicinal mixtures. Well, the chief commissar, Stewart, I had an agreement that whenever that come in, we'd use a little bit of, he'd bring a can of orange juice. You got to cut it down first from 190 proof. When we left San Diego, after sick call, regular sick call, I was in the sick bay there, and we carried a LSM aboard, piggyback, and there were 7 members in that crew. And Ensign Ware was the guy's name that was in charge of it. He came down to the sick bay, and I never knew him from nothing, but he started talking to me there. He said he thought maybe he might have had some social disease. I said, okay, well, it'll check you out. I took a GC smear on him, you know, and put it under the glass, and yeah, there they are, little corkscrews going round and round. I told him, you've got the gonorrhea. And I said, before we left San Diego, we went to see the medical doctors there, and all the pharmacists, first-class pharmacist mates, and he gave us some penicillin and talked to us about penicillin for a couple of hours and what to look for in a reaction. And I says, one of the things that will cure is what you got, and quick. He said, is there any way you can keep it off of my records? I don't know. I says, I'll get myself in trouble. Yeah, finally I told him, if you get cured in 3 days, we'll forget about it. And our ship went to Guam, and then we got orders to sail for Pearl Harbor, and we were going to go back and pick up the 98th Division and get ready for a big landing in Kyushu, Japanese island. And we started, and halfway across the Pacific, the war ended. You got word that the war was over. So when we got back to Pearl Harbor, I was transferred off right away because I had more than enough points for transfer, and I was sent to a receiving station in Aiya, and there I stayed for a couple of weeks. And the man in charge there said, you look at this list every day in the morning. When you get up, if your name's on there, he says, we got transportation for you back to the States. For 2 weeks I roamed around Hawaii, and finally one morning my name's on there with a whole bunch of others. And I came back aboard the USS Monterey, an aircraft carrier. And I asked one of the ship's company, what'd you do with all your planes? He said, oh, we got orders to shove them over the side when we were 100 miles out there. They're no good anymore. They're outdated. No one to fly them. Reserve officers. So they do it the easy way. Just and we came back through Panama, which tickled me pink, and up into New York City. Wow. One night of liberty in New York City. A wild time. I think there were 1,000 of us on that. Slept on the hangar deck. They had cots for each one of us, 2 meals a day. But we didn't care. We were on our way home. And, from there we caught a train the next day, Lehigh Valley, and it took us to Sampson Separation Center. Isn't that amazing? One day the Sampson's the training base. A couple days later they changed it to Separation Center. Anyway, there's only one thing I really remember about the trip. The train stopped in Scranton. There was a lot of women on the loading platforms there, and we had a 20-minute stop there. Boy, the guys piled out there, went out there and socialized with the female population. And when we left Scranton, the guy that sat next to me, I didn't know him before, on the train, wasn't back aboard. He must have met a mighty nice female someplace along the way. He probably didn't care what the heck, he's going to get discharged anyway. I'll get to Sampson on my own. And that ended my naval career. They give me a check for my transportation by bus back to Olean, where I enlisted. And they gave me $100 mustering out pay, and plus what I had on the books as first class petty officer, sea duty and all that. I had a lot of money in my pocket when I left Sampson, but I went up there and I hitchhiked, and I said, whichever way I get a ride first, that's the direction I'm going. Well, got a ride going to Syracuse. So I used to have some good friends on the Onondaga there. So I decided I'd pay them a visit before I came home. I finally left there, and I caught a train to Binghamton, and I caught train 5 into Salamanca. Gets there at 5:30 in the morning. Yeah, there were some Indian woman boarding a train there, going to Jamestown, I guess, and one of them looked across and they saw it was me. And I was told later, and she told the others, that was George Heron. Oh, he must have been really through it, It was pretty tough. He didn't realize I was riding out a 2-day drunk in Syracuse. When I got home, I went down to the Allegheny River. This is in October. I waited out there, and all my hatred vanished, just like that. Yeah.